Hello, y'all. Another episode of Not Doing Nothing, where I am doing nothing except for talking about things I'm thinking about. Great. So what I've been thinking about this morning is the fact that scientists in the field of psychology and I suppose neurology seem to have found fairly conclusively that to a large degree our political views are influenced by our biology. Now that's fascinating. As far as I'm concerned, this finding should be shouted from the rooftops. Every mainstream media outlet that talks about politics should be screaming this, that this division that we're feeling throughout the West is due to some divergence in biology. Fascinating. It would be like blondes and brunettes arguing about which hair color is the best, or tall and short people debating which height is the optimal height. It makes the debate seem a little bit less grounded in right and wrong, and maybe grounded in personal preferences. The coffee that I'm drinking today is Peruvian, I think it's a cachura bean. It's a medium roast, and it tastes really piney, sprucey, like a coniferous tree. That's really interesting. I've never tasted that in a coffee. It's nice. So there are these traits that are psychological traits that I guess can be said to be rooted to a large degree in biology. Some people say 50%, some people say up to something like 80 or 90% biologically rooted. Anyway, the traits that seem to determine people's political proclivities the most are these two traits that seem to have an inverse effect. So there's this trait called conscientiousness, and that breaks down into two sub-traits, I guess you'd call them, called organization and industriousness. So diligence, hardworking, things like that. The other trait is openness, which breaks down into openness to experience and intellect. And intellect sounds a lot like intelligence. It has that connotation, but that's really not at all what's implied. It has to do with the way your mind works, or what your mind gravitates towards. Having an interest in abstract concepts, maybe things like philosophy, things like that. Having I think thoughts that are less structured. And that to me seems like in opposition with organization, because someone who has a mind for organization, and that is very organized, is going to have thoughts and notion very bounded. There'll be clear delineations between things, and that keeps you very, very structured, and maybe makes it more easy for you to act in a diligent, conscientious manner. Conversely, having a mind that's a little bit more free-flowing and open, where ideas are sort of floating around a little bit everywhere, might make it difficult for one to be more organized and straightforward thinking, and might enable more creativity. So you can probably guess that conservatives in general tend to have much higher conscientiousness and much lower openness, and people who are on the progressive end of the spectrum tend to be much higher in openness and much lower in conscientiousness. Who'd have thunk it? Now, is there one that's right and wrong between those two? I think the obvious answer is no. I think that what we would find if we thought about it for 2 seconds is that both having people who specialize in both those domains is an important thing in our society. If you look at a publishing house, for example, what does a publishing house need? They need books, so they need people who are open-minded and creative to write the books. And then what else do you need? Well, you need the actual mechanism by which these books are going to get published and distributed. You need people who are organized, who are going to show up on time, and who are going to figure out the logistics of getting this book out the door, printed, and into Barnes and Nobles and bought by the general public. So you need both. So this debate, this shrill, obnoxious debate between the two clans, when you look at it from a biological perspective, begins to look like a disagreement between men and women. And actually, there is quite a significant difference between men and women politically. But anyway. So it starts to look like that. And if anyone was to put forward the proposition that all you need is men or all you need is women, or women are entirely correct and we need to create an entirely feminine society, or that men are correct and we need to create an entirely masculine society, I think that person would be laughed away. We understand that we need men and women for the furtherment of our species and for the furtherment of our societies, and that we need both masculine energies and feminine energies to keep us righted, to keep us balanced and healthy. So I think it is with these two different ends on the political spectrum. They both serve a different purpose within the public space, and both are as necessary as the other. One seems to keep the machine running, keeps things intact, and the other seems to be the ones that push the envelope, that bring newness into our society. You know, these are the entrepreneurs, the creators, the artists. The more conservative people might be the managers, the logicians, the engineers, the road workers, those kinds of people that keep our society actually functional and livable, that keep the power on in our buildings, that make it so that when I go to the bathroom and flush, my excrement precipitously leaves the vicinity. That's a great thing. So having this view, being extremely biased as I am, I'm the worst, so most of this is for me, might help me in having a little bit more compassion or openness to see the other side's point of view and understand that these things might be less of a question of being right and wrong. In fact, this ought to throw a bit of a wrench into my way of thinking, that I'm entirely right and that anyone who disagrees with me must be necessarily entirely wrong. And might lead me to think that these are just different flavors. We're arguing about what we like to eat. You know, tacos are as good as spaghetti. It just depends on personal preference. Someone who's highly conscientious, who's likely to show up to work on time, who likes to work overtime, who works like a dog, in the Anglosphere, them being more conservative would probably mean that they're into lower taxes and you know, fair enough. These people don't want to give up their hard-earned money. These are the workhorses that keep our society going. They feel like they ought to reap the benefits of their labor. Conversely, the people who are a little bit more open-minded on the spectrum have a bit of a, well, less safe approach. It's a little bit more risky. If what you spend your days doing is painting murals of feces and blood, there's a chance that people won't buy what it is you're putting out there. If you can't show up on time to your job, chances are you're going to get fired. They're out there taking risks, and therefore they're sort of going for a big hit. They're going to come up with the latest company or piece of technology that's going to drive our society forward and create a great deal of comfort and happiness and luxury, or whatever it is. But chances are lots of them aren't going to succeed, and they're not going to succeed right away, so they're going to spend most of their lives living in their parents' basement. So you can understand why they'd want a society with a little bit more of a safety net, a little bit more of a welfare state with a cushion. Now, are either of them entirely wrong? No, they're just people who are self-interested. So in my mind, the political game now takes on this new dimension where it's less about who's right and wrong and more, how do we keep this thing functional? How do we keep this relationship from getting out of hand? I like to look at my own relationship because we are total extremes, not politically, but we don't align on those two dimensions that I mentioned. For example, I'm very high in openness, insanely high in openness. You know, my thoughts are just stupid squiggly lines or whatever. And I'm pretty low in conscientiousness, much to my own chagrin. I have a very hard time being organized and living within a framework. I hate it. I absolutely hate shackles and bounds and plans. Whereas my girlfriend, being herself and also being German, is highly conscientious, but she's not so high on the openness scale. She's rather low. And so as much as this causes friction, because I think where there is a certain amount of divergence, there's inevitably going to be a great deal of friction, we also really help each other. We really complement each other. So it might be like that with society, where both ends of the spectrum not only are valid, but actually complement each other in creating a more fruitful society. This might be an evolutionary mechanism that's evolved for millions or thousands of years, or whatever it may be. And it might be a very important mechanism. And so it might be a healthy little switch for us to try to make in general, to view the political affair less as a question of winning or losing, but more as a means of keeping the ship righted, keep us from strangling one another, like we seem to be on the verge of doing. And basically, maybe that's not the mechanism of society that's supposed to drive change. Maybe it's the specialists, each in their own corner, doing their thing. Maybe that's where we're going to see the most positive change in our society. Just sort of letting that play out over time. Anyway, I'm trying to make that switch in my mind, but as I said, I'm very much a very biased person who thinks he's entirely correct and has a very hard time seeing the other side. But I make a bit of an effort, as John Stuart Mill said, and he didn't say it exactly this way. He said it in a much better way. But he said something like, you can't really hold your opinion until you've seen the other side in its most persuasive, elegant form. You can't just you don't really know your own point of view, I think maybe is what he said, unless you know the other side's, the opposite, the converse point of view in its best possible form. And I think a lot of people don't do that. They don't expose themselves to the best material of the other side, they always look for the weakest argument. They look for the low-hanging fruit. And then they feel some sense of moral or intellectual superiority. I do that a lot. And I suspect lots of others do. Anyway, that's a thought I've been throwing around. Is this interesting at all? Let me know, or don't. But cheers. Thanks for watching.